Memphis design. So Memphis design is basically a very sort of simplistic form of design which looks at shape and pattern. So really sort of geometrical forms, lots of different patterns and very sort of flat, bright colours. You'll know it as sort of almost like the retro sort of 80s aesthetic. So I've just done a Pinterest search for Memphis typography. You can see we've got these bright colours. You can see we've got sort of 3D style text. We've got text that has got these sort of patterns and use of colour and use of line to create the letter forms. Again, we've got these patterns and shapes here. Combination of 3D style type, bright colours, patterns again. Same thing going on here. Text made out of these shapes and these patterns to actually form the letter forms. So you can see these sort of like repeating sort of elements. This one's quite nice here where they've got this interesting sort of pattern and shape design in the background, and then you've got this text which has got a little shadow under it. So as you sort of look at the style, as you look at these sort of examples, you'll see lots of similarities and lots of things that we can draw from. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a go at this sort of 3D style of text with this use of pattern and then some simple shapes. So there's multiple ways to do this sort of 3D style text. I'm using a fairly blocky font here, just because I want to make my life a little bit easier. So I'm going to go for something like that. I'm going to make it a bit bigger. So you can see I've got my first layer of text there, and I'm going to make this blue. Now, a really simple way to do 3D style text is to just copy and paste it. I'm going to change the colour so we can see what we're doing. So I'll go for a yellow one. I'm going to line it up as close as I can. And I'm going to put that layer underneath. And then I'm going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard, and I'm going to step a bit to the right or the left and step a bit down. And you can see as I go across and down, we get this sort of distortion, this almost like shadow effect. So I could leave it there. So if I go back a few steps and say about there. So I could leave it like that, that's fine. If I wanted to get this sort of almost like 3D block text effect, I need to then start to fill in the gaps a little bit. So I'm going to zoom into this. And I'm actually going to just copy and paste this for a second. Obviously this is sort of like a 3D text viewed from above. If I delete that second one. If I wanted this to look as though it was on an angle, so if we go back to some of these examples where the text is physically sort of on an angle, it's distorted, it looks as though it's almost moving away from you, like some of these examples here where it physically looks as though it's on an angle, we've got something called the perspective tool. So if I go to edit, transform, and I need to rasterize this first. Now, if you don't use rasterize locks that. So I can't change the font anymore. I can't change the colour. If I've spelt it wrong, I can't edit that either. So you've got to be sort of happy with whatever you've put together before you rasterize it. And then you can see perspective comes up as an option. Now, with perspective, you always want to move the long edges first. So you can see I've got the long edges and I've got the short edges. So if I wanted something to look as though it's going off into the distance, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to make it smaller. Now what you'll notice is if I make it smaller, it also makes that one smaller. So it controls both of them. So that's why you always do your long edges first and get those sort of about halfway where you want it. So now we've got that almost physically going off into the distance. So if I did the same thing again, now to change this time, if I want to recolour it, I'm going to have to use my paint bucket tool. And again, pop that behind. And just offset it slightly. I could go like that so that it looks like it's sort of gone behind it. So you can see we've got that sort of like 3D text effect going on there in two very different styles. I'm going to do this top one because that's going to be a little bit easier for me to sort of visualise. Now, if I just do a new layer over the top so you can see what I'm going to try and get at, I'm just going to use my brush tool a second. And I'm just going to go to my normal brushes and I'm going to make it smaller. Smaller again. Okay, So what I want is I want this to feel like it's connected. So I'm going to want to do something like that with a line there, and then the same here, like that, etc. So that's going to want to connect up there, that's going to want to connect down there, that one's going to want to connect down there, and put an outline around it. And that's going to want to connect behind there. So you can see how this is going to sort of like all the corners are going to want to join up with all the other corners, and then we're going to want a nice clear sort of outline between these things coming behind this text, like that. So it's going to be a little bit tricky, so I'm just going to delete that layer a second. First thing I'm going to do is make this text in the right shape. So I've got bits missing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my polygonal lasso, and I'm going to get zoomed in. I'm going to do it on a new layer, and I'm going to join up these corners. So I'm going to select there, and then I'm just going to draw around, and I'm going to fill it that colour. And D to deselect. So you'll see automatically that's made a difference between that sort of 3D effect that we didn't have before. So I'm going to do the same thing and fill it with that yellow colour. Same thing again. So I'm just joining up the corners, filling in that extra space that needs to be there. Now I would need to go on and do that to all my other letters. Now at the moment, if I do Command D, that is on its own layer. It's not connected to that other layer. So if I then add my stroke to this bottom layer, it doesn't include those extra bits, which is not what we want. So I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to rasterize this layer, and then I'm going to merge those two layers so that all the yellow shapes, the text and the bits I've added on, become one thing. So now it's all one layer. So you'll see now, as soon as I go on and add my stroke, it does it around the whole outside of it now, which is exactly what we want. I'm also going to add the same stroke to my top layer so that they blend in together. Go, so you can see that's looking a lot nicer now. The other thing I'm going to need to do, so if we look at this R specifically, it still doesn't quite look right, it doesn't quite look 3D. So I'm going to add a new layer over the top, and I'm going to use my paintbrush tool, and I'm going to go a bit thinner. Let's take it down to 10-ish. Now I'm going to use Shift here. So if I click, oh, you see I'm in yellow. Let me change that to black so that you can see. If I click, hold Shift and click, it will draw me a perfectly straight line between those 2 points. Now I'm going to make my line a bit thinner, but you can see what I'm doing here. So I'm now on a brand new layer, I'm going back over and adding in those connecting corner lines that make this look 3D. And now you can see I need a sort of line there to join that up. Click, Shift, click. So you would need to then go and do that for all the other letters. But that gives me my sort of 3D blocky style text. I would obviously do the same thing here. So I would have a stroke around here, and then I would be joining these corners up on their own layer, and you would get a similar effect. Obviously what I would need to do at the end of this is sort of get this all grouped so that it all stays in one place and we've not got lots of things moving around. So I'm just going to use a little folder icon to group those, and that's all nice and neat in a group now. If I go back to this example, you can see I've got my 3D style text all done. I've also got a pattern inside of that text. So the next thing I'm going to do, now you can make your own pattern. You could get a pattern off the internet. Perfect. So I'm just dragging in an image of a pattern off the internet. I've gone for black and white because that's nice and simple, it's nice and clean and crisp. Makes my life a little bit easier. So I'm going to slim that down like that. And just fit it over the top. Now I think I want 2 of these because I want it to go quite long across the word, so I just need to line those up. Like that. So again, I'm going to merge these so that they're one thing. Now if I turn the opacity down, you can sort of see that that's going to go over the whole of my text, which I don't want. If I use one of my sort of multiplies or blend modes, again you can see that sort of adds, but I only want it on the top part of the letters. I want it to just go in that first bit. So in order to do that, I'm just going to hide that layer for a minute. I'm going to use my magic wand, and I'm going to go onto my text layer, so this blue text here, which is that top one. So if I select that layer, select that text. Now I've got contiguous unticked, so if I go back and do it again, it only selects one letter. So you need to have that unticked to select all of the letters. And then nice and simple, I can bring my pattern back, select my pattern layer. Now you can see that selection is on my pattern layer. So if I Command C and Command C to copy and paste, so Command C and V, it gives me that just that selection out of what I've selected. So now if I add that into that group, quite like that subtle one, quite like that one as well. So now I've got that pattern on the top of my letters, and I've got my letters looking 3D. So already we're starting to look like some of the examples that we've got on here. Things like this. Things like this where we've got 3D text and pattern inside, especially sort of this one. So that's a good start for number one. We also need to add some more stuff. Use lots of other shapes and colours and things. So here I'm going to make these little shapes and I'm going to give them that little shadow effect. You can see we're using that sort of stroke effect as well. So I'm going to go to my triangle tool, make myself a pointed little triangle, and I'm going to fill it with yellow. And then I'm going to double click my layer, use that stroke effect to get the same sort of outline on it, put it where I want it. I'm going to do the same with a little rectangle, like that. Let's make it blue, double click, add that stroke effect, stick that one there. The other ones I've got on there are these sort of like funky line effect things. So the way I've done those is I've used my pen tool. If you're familiar with Illustrator, this will look similar. Pen tool does work in a similar way in Photoshop, but you don't have as much control. So I'm going to do that sort of jaggedy one by doing across, down, across, down, across. Obviously not perfect. I'm going to take the fill off and just give it a stroke, which is going to be, let's go sort of an orangey colour. So that gives me my sort of like blocky shape. And then I'm actually going to go and add an extra stroke over the top. So then it gives me that blocky shape with that outline. So I've got my sort of zigzaggy shape there. I want to do a similar thing, but obviously with a sort of curved version. So you can see I've got like a zigzaggy one and a curved one. So if I do that one there, go back to my pen tool. This time I'm going to click and drag. If you're familiar with pen tool, that will be a familiar thing with you. Click and drag, click and drag, drag. Now, obviously not perfect, so if I don't get it right first time, I've got a direct selection tool tucked away in here, which means I can go back and edit those points. Then, if I go back to that pen tool, and I'm just going to change that to no fill, and I'm going to add, let's do like a purpley colour, stroke, make the stroke sort of chunky, and then same again, double click my layer, add that stroke to the outside of that layer, and that's my curvy little shape done as well. Now you could make repeating patterns out of these, you could play around with them a little bit more, but that's my sort of basics. The last thing to do for this one is to add this sort of shadowy layer, this sort of duplicated shadow underneath. So I'm going to copy and paste the shape, put it underneath but just slightly off, and then I'm going to take the stroke off, so I've just got the colour, and then I'm going to use my blend modes and something like darken, multiply, one of those that gives us that sort of probably darken, etc. So that's our first one pretty much done. The next one we're going to do is a little bit more complicated. It's a similar thing. So 3D text, but with just that misaligned effect, and then we're making all these patterns and textures in the background. I've gone for a different type of text this time. So I'm going to find sort of something that feels a bit more handwritten. And I'm going to go lowercase this time. There we go. Let's change that to pink. Now, what I need to do obviously is group all of this previous design, get that out of our way, and lock it in place. So then I can see clearly the one I'm using now, which is these two. So I'm going to group those as well so that they don't shift, or that they shift together, should I say. Now, here we're just going to be using a mixture of shapes. So I'm going to draw myself a triangle, put that there, and I want that to be this blue colour. Stick that underneath, make it a little bit bigger. Now I've got a bit of an unusual shape here, this sort of like elongated rectangular shape. I can make that two ways. I could do polygonal lasso and fill it in on its own new layer. Use the paint bucket tool, like so, and Command D. So that gives me that shape. Or I could use the pen tool and make sure that it says shape up here. You've got an option of shape or path. And again, that gives me the same effect. Grid pattern is obviously just a series of rectangles duplicated, which is nice and simple to do. Now I'm going to hold Alt and click and drag, and you can see it will give me that shape repeated, and it helps me line them up. There, select all of those, Command C, Command V, rotate, stick that back over the top, group the whole thing together. So nice and simple. So that's my sort of, I guess, grid effect, and I can put that in there. Also, we can do the last thing we've got here is a semicircle. So really simple way to make a semicircle. Draw yourself a circle. It's inside my group. Just shimmy that. There we go. And then I'm going to draw over the half that I want, and Command C, Command V. Rasterize the layer, and then Command C, Command V, and it gives me that semicircle to work with. I'll put it about there. And then the other thing we'd got was sections of this triangle cut out. So I'm going to copy and paste my triangle. Just move that out of the way so I can look at it on its own. I'm going to do my rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to have it here. So I'm going to have that one selected, which lets me do multiple. So I'm going to draw multiple boxes. Now obviously my triangle's on a slight angle, which doesn't help. And these aren't all the same width or distance apart, but it doesn't matter right now. And then I can rasterize a triangle, copy and paste, which just gives me those sections, and then I only want half of them, so I'm going to do that and delete, Command D to deselect, and then I can layer that back over the top of the original triangle. And do something like that. So that's my second Memphis style design. Obviously you can push that a lot further, play around with more effects, more patterns, more blend modes, more layering. This one. Last thing I'm going to do is have a go at creating my own letters, so something like this or like that specifically. So the letters itself and sort of breaking them down into sections, creating them out of different things. So obviously need to group my previous design so that it's nice and neat and tidy. Delete any spare layers that I don't need anymore. Don't need those, don't need those. So I'm going to write my word out again. I'm going to do it in all capitals this time, so I think that's going to be easier. Now I want to choose a really sort of geometric font, so this font's not going to help me at all. So I want to go really sort of clean, crisp, simple, geometric. It's going to make my life a lot easier when I start to edit this. Always start with a simple font if you're going to do anything to it, if you're going to edit it at all. So looks boring for now, but that's what we're going to start with. I'm going to change it to our blue colour. I drop that blue. Now, when we look back at those examples, each part of the text is sort of made up in a different way. So I'm going to start with the E because I think that's going to be easiest. I'm going to draw over with my rectangular marquee that hot sort of vertical part stem of the E, and I'm going to Command C, Command V and copy and paste it. So that gives me that vertical stem of the E. I'm then going to do the same here for this first horizontal. Go back to my text layer, Command C, Command V, and you'll see that gives me my first horizontal. Now, first thing I'm going to do is use my paint bucket. I'm going to eyedrop this pink colour, paint bucket that layer, and you can see now, if I put that layer on top, I can overlap that back with the original, and if I want that to be even more exciting, I could do something like multiply. I might create this next part of the E with some sort of thin stripes, so let's do some black stripes for some contrast. And again, I'm going to use Alt to sort of duplicate. Shimmy those so that they're sort of in line. And then I'm going to rasterize those so that I can merge them so that they become one flat layer. And then when I zoom out, I can put those to make that last part of my E. So you can see that's my first letter. You basically want to just break it down, play around. So I'm literally just chopping up parts of the letters, and you can see I've done that here. What I'll show you next is this bit here and this bit here is how I get pattern to go inside more complex shapes. Obviously with the E, I've just done a series of stripes, so that's nice and simple. If I go to the R, first thing I'm going to need to do is that first stem, so go to my text layer, Command C, Command V, so that first vertical, get that out of the way. Then I'm going to want to draw over sort of where I think this main other bit goes, so that main sort of top section of the R, Command C, Command V on my text layer. Now I don't want that bit, because I just want this sort of main part here, so I'm actually going to go back in with my selection tool, and I'm just going to go in and delete out that middle. So I need to make sure I'm on the right layer, use my selection tool, and then press delete on my keyboard, and it will erase that. Obviously it's not perfect, but it's done the job. And then I'm going to put that back over the top. I'm actually going to group my E together so that things aren't too complicated. So I know what I'm doing. So now I've got those two parts. If I line those back up, again, I'm going to fill that a different colour with my paint bucket tool and set it to multiply, like so. And then we've just got this bottom part to do. So I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to draw over where I think that bottom part sort of goes. Command C, Command V on my text layer to get that shape out. Now this time I need to do some trimming. So you've got a couple of options. If you've got quite a steady hand, you can go in with your eraser tool and tidy that up. But I do not have much of a steady hand. That's not terrible. So I could do that to tidy it up. I could do my polygonal lasso, and again just be sort of careful to create a sort of curved effect. Select the bit I don't want. I'm just going to shimmy that way. Make sure I'm on the right layer, press delete. So I could do that. I also don't want this extra sort of part of the vertical, so I'm going to get rid of that as well. And D to deselect. Then I can layer this back in place, so I'm going to put that there. Same thing again, I'm going to eyedrop a colour, use my paint bucket tool, colour it that colour. So we're starting to get quite exciting now. Now if I wanted to put some sort of pattern or texture in there, so let's just make, again you could get one off the internet, I'm just going to make some random shapes and patterns to put on there. Now I can lay that over the top of my letters, or my section of the letter that I want to fill with that. It's going to be this bit, like so. Now what I want to do is use my selection tool, so I'm going to find that part of the R that I want, which is this one here. And I'm going to use my magic wand. So my magic wand will select that shape, so you can see it selects that whole shape. And then I'm going to go to my image or my text or my whatever my pattern is, Command C, Command V, and it will give me that, so I can hide the original, and it just cuts out that section for me. Then I can line that up with the original, group those together so that they stay together, and I'm actually going to put them back in there like that. So there we have pattern texture inside of that shape. So you can see that's basically the system we follow to do this. It's a similar thing with this, so all I've done is done my letter O. I'm going to take half of it on my text layer, Command C, Command V, like that. So we'll just go back and make a new layer. So now I should be able to magic wand the layer that's got the letter on, and same thing again, go to the layer that's got the pattern or texture on it, Command C, Command V, hide the original, and then my pattern or texture simply lives within that shape. And obviously I can group those together to make my life easier. So you can see they're now contained, and then obviously what I would do is go back and get the other half of the letter from my text layer, Command C, Command V, match that up to make the rest of the letter, and then paint bucket that a different colour. So those are my 3 different Memphis style typography experiments. We've had a go at some 3D sort of imitation lettering with patterns and textures and shapes. We've had a look at different styles of letters with different patterns of more sort of complex uses of shapes. And then we've had a go at physically making letters out of different shapes, patterns, textures, overlaying them, cutting them out, filling the letters with those patterns as well.